Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. First of all, from myself, the Newswire team, and all of Indus News, let me first wish you a blessed, peaceful, and happy Eid. Now, Eid al-Adha is remembered as the ultimate sacrifice, a three-day Muslim festival to essentially honor the willingness of Prophet Ibrahim to sacrifice his son as an act of obedience to Allah. Now, for many around the world, it is, of course, a time of celebration, but in areas where there is conflict going on, a war is going on, it is indeed a very difficult time, especially for the current events of what is unfolding here in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Eid is mired with conflict, blood, and tears, and once again, the Rest Valley is seeing its darkest hour. After revoking over Article 370 by a rush presidential decree by the BJP-led Indian government, there has been a complete media and communications blackout for most part of the week, the lead up to which was intense military buildup of Indian troops across the region. Streets which had become those of a ghost town are now, as few reports coming out from the region, are filled with tens of thousands of protesters being showered by pellet guns and steel-coated bullets, rubber-coated steel bullets. Kashmir is not the only Muslim-majority state. There are many other regions across the world, especially in the Middle East, where celebrations are being, of course, affected by the war taking place there. To discuss the importance of not just this religious festival, but also how it unfolds in regions where there is so much conflict, I'd like to welcome our guests who are joining us. We have with us Mr. Shaheryar Mirza, senior editor of TRT, joining us from Istanbul. And of course, we have with us Mr. Muzzamil Thakur, an analyst, joining us from London. Welcome to both of you to the show. I want to start with you, Mr. Mirza. It's a very difficult time, obviously, for those in Jammu and Kashmir, with very little information coming out. How do you see it, the kind of clampdown? Do you think it's an unprecedented sort of security checkpoints everywhere and the kind of media blackout that is taking place? And how does this affect a time like Eid, where essentially everyone should be out celebrating with family and loved ones?
Look, I think there's no doubt that this is unprecedented. I can't recall any time in recent history where there's been such a kind of massive clampdown on communication in Jammu and Kashmir or Ladakh, where basically even landlines are closed. I work with a lot of Kashmiris, and nobody has really been able to talk to their family. There have been snippets of information coming out. It's very hard for Kashmiris who don't know what the state of their families and friends are. Hospitals, we don't know if they're running at full capacity, or if they have supplies, or if they have electricity, or whatever it might be. Now, of course, I don't think over the last few years there's been a lot of unrest in Jammu and Kashmir, and I don't think that Eid has been celebrated with as much happiness as it usually is. But this Eid, I think, is quite unprecedented, and I don't think anyone is really going to have the time or the wherewithal to really be celebrating anything, especially when a lot of Kashmiris that we've spoken to and that have come on and that have written for us or that I'm in touch with say that this is essentially an attempt to steal and to end Kashmiri identity, both political, cultural, and personal.
Right. And Mr. Thakur, we last spoke to you, and at that point, there was still the curfew and the blackout, the communication blackout, and you were struggling to get in touch with your loved ones and family members in Jammu and Kashmir. Tell us a little about how it's been the past few days, and especially on this momentous occasion where this should be a time of celebration for all. What is there been any progress in getting in touch with family members?
Some people have been able to communicate with family members. We are hearing reports that small pockets of areas have 2G signal. Some broadband, some landlines are working, but with very limited connectivity. The local police stations, I believe that the head of those police stations are offering people their services in regards to using a lease line and satellite telephones to make 60-second telephone calls to their loved ones. However, with people like me who have family in far-flung villages where electricity barely works, and hardly, I would doubt that they even know that Article 370 has been revoked. To get in touch with them is unrealistic for me at this point in time. However, I have some friends that I've been speaking to, and they've been telling me that there has been an semi-uprising in some parts of Srinagar city, and specifically Srinagar city is mentioned because we don't know what all the other cities the situations are, because the telephone lines, again, non-existent. The BBC and other news channels that are going are staying mostly in Srinagar.
Okay, so here I'd also like to welcome the international law expert, Mr. Ahmer Bilal. You're joining us from Islamabad. Thank you for taking out the time to speak to us. I understand that you are part of the special committee that was formulated by Prime Minister Imran Khan in response to the change in occupied Kashmir. Tell us a little about what this committee is heading out to do, and what are the challenges it's facing at this point.
Well, I think the Prime Minister is very clear that we need to find way forward from a legal standpoint, diplomatic and political standpoint. My contribution is from a legal standpoint. The other entities which are working in this is the Law Ministry, where the teams are working, and I believe the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Minister is himself leading that, and the Attorney General of Pakistan. Basically, from a legal preparation point of view, the work is focusing on bringing the matter to the notice of various UN forums, foremost being the UN Security Council. And in this regard, I believe the Foreign Minister of Pakistan has already written a brief letter to the Secretary General. So that appears to be the starting point, and other legal options are also being explored and researched. So it may not be in order for me to make a disclosure of what else we are considering, because let that be given to the committee and to the Prime Minister for them to make a political decision on that.
Okay, so but Mr. Soofi, could you highlight for us, being an international law expert yourself, what is the perception, what does the international law say about religious liberty at a time like Eid, especially in war zones, and specifically here, what we're seeing in Indian occupied Kashmir, where there's absolute shutdown, lockdown, and intense military buildup. People aren't even able to make it out of their doors to the neighborhood mosque. Is there any kind of understanding of a kind of a ceasefire situation that should exist, any kind of human rights that should be protected in terms of religious freedom?
Well, obviously, if you look at even the Constitution of India, which is de facto being stretched on this territory, that itself guarantees the freedom of movement, of freedom of religious practice. And of course, if India de facto claims annexation of this territory, then it has a duty to ensure the implementation of international covenant on civil and political rights, which further guarantees the same rights, and the curfew is against those rights unless you are able to issue a statement derogating from the convention itself, which has not been filed by India. So clearly India is in default in terms of human rights and IHL obligations under its constitution, as well as under the international law, which is ICCPR and several other international conventions. In these circumstances, I think they are coming under intense pressure, and Pakistan is also playing a pivotal role in increasing that pressure. So I believe as soon as the curfew gets lifted, the Kashmiris' reaction will be a very determining factor in terms of how the strategy moves forward from this point onwards.
And also, Mr. Soofi, how the Indian government handles that kind of reaction from the Kashmiris, knowing their history with the kind of crowd engagement strategies and techniques that they employ. They're in continuous violations of basic human rights law. What can these international organizations that are responsible for implementing these rules and regulation, or at least be an effective sort of watchdog over it, what can they impose over the government of India to prevent any kind of mass genocide happening over there?
Let's not underestimate the power of social media, because it takes a few days to get it to a certain level where it becomes imposing to a point where you cannot resist it further. That's the pressure it builds up. And that's how it's happening. Gradually, the awareness is catching up. The Indian lawyers are writing extensively against what has happened. The Indian politicians believe it's a betrayal of the promise made by the founding fathers of India. People like Shashi Tahur and others have, stood up in the parliament and destroyed this from a political and a constitutional point of view. Indian lawyers like A.G. Noorani and others are writing over it. And as these writings, these utterances carry the attention of the world, the pressure will mount on India itself. So clearly, this is an extreme measure that very few kind of predicted. And once you take an extreme measure, then you should be ready for the extreme response, whether it comes from the people of Kashmir, from the people of India, from Pakistan, and from diaspora of Kashmiris abroad or international community. I think as the days passes, you'll see a rise in that. But what I am more concerned about is that international community has a very little window in terms of time to find a solution to this matter, because the time that we're looking at is that once people, especially the young Muslims in India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Bangladesh, in South Asia and elsewhere, develop this sense of helplessness, that is going to be very, very dangerous. And then you never know, then you can't control the script. It can lead to transnational events. If you remember, in case of Palestine, things were happening in Palestine and aircrafts were hijacked in Munich, or, killings of certain nationals were done. So that could be a very ugly scenario. So I think it will threaten international peace and security. And in that context, international community needs to step in an organized fashion to persuade India to resolve this issue with Pakistan.
Mr. Soofi, you mentioned that there's a very small window left of time on how to put a stop to a possible, if not already, a mass number of killings here of protesters here by the Indian authorities. Tell us a little about what the UN itself can do at a time like this in trying to not just sort of let information flow through, but stop the kind of suppression, subjugation that is taking place, obviously, of those in Jammu and Kashmir.
Human Rights Council, Human Rights Commission, Human Rights Office in Geneva can play a critical role in this, and also the UN Security Council can play a critical role in this in terms of giving specific directions. And India is playing on enhancing this curfew so that people's interest and people's motivation could be subdued. I don't think so that will happen. Sooner or later, they'll have to yield. They'll have to lift the sanctions. They'll have to lift the curfew. They'll have to allow the net to work and the Google to flow and people be allowed the social media access. And as soon as that happens, we will see the reaction, and that will be difficult for them to handle.
It will be difficult for them to handle for sure, but tell us a little about the expectations of the government of Pakistan from the UN and other organizations, from the West, from Donald Trump's administration. What kind of expectations are we looking at right now?
I'm not too sure on that. That's not my field to assess political or diplomatic expectation. I'm looking at it from a legal standpoint. But in generic terms, obviously, Pakistan thinks this has been wronged. And the pledge that India had, even with Pakistan under Simla Agreement, or for that matter, Lahore Declaration, where they insisted on bilateralism, has been breached. And likewise, the international law contained in UN resolutions has also been disregarded.
So, Mr. Soofi, very quickly, the very fact that India has made the most unilateral move on Indian-occupied Kashmir since this conflict began, does this essentially throw out the similar agreement in the Lahore resolution over this being a bilateral issue will be only resolved between India and Pakistan?
Well, that is what India's stated position was. They tried to step out of the law applicable under the 1617 resolution that were passed in late 40s and early 50s. And their argument was that now they have been sidestepped and Pakistan and India have entered into a bilateral treaty, which is not true in terms of the way I look at it. But nevertheless, even if you assume India's position, then they have even contradicted their own position by unilaterally altering and aggravating the legal features of the dispute, and which could further, as I said, deteriorate to a level where it can endanger international peace and security. And if you look at Chapter 6 and 7 of the UN Charter, they use the terms dispute and situation, two distinct eventualities in which UN takes cognizance. So this is a situation where both coexist. A dispute is pending, which is unresolved, and a situation is deteriorating to a level where it can actually endanger the peace of the region and also international peace.
All right, Mr. Ahmer Bilal Soofi there talking from Islamabad. Thank you so much for giving us the time. Mr. Muzzamil Thakur, coming back to you here. The conversation was a little bit also about the kind of repercussions that are waiting to happen or already unfolding there, considering the reports and the lack of reports coming from Indian occupied Kashmir. The kind of pressure cooker effect, the very question over what Prime Minister Modi says that this is better for the Kashmiris, this is how they will get more development, more funding, they'll be treated as equals like the rest of the states. It puts into question then why is it in the first place the necessity of putting so many military men on the ground in such a small area, not even allowing them the normal day-to-day movement?
No, the fact that he made such a statement to the nation and to people of Kashmir and saying congratulations and whatnot. The irony is that there was no electricity and there was no internet and there were no TV channels that were picking up on that, so nobody actually knew what his address was. The fact that he needed military personnel inside Kashmir, even though they didn't know what was going on, means that they anticipated that there was going to be some kind of backlash. It clearly means that the government of India, fully knowing that the people of Kashmir will reject all kinds of opportunities that India are going to give them instead of the right to self-determination. Those military personnel, from what I understood and from what the Home Minister, Amit Shah, has mentioned, they won't be taking them back. As for the lines of communication, I'm not entirely sure whether they're going to be reinstated anytime soon. But at this point in time, I do agree with Ahmed Bilal Sufi Saab that the bilateral issue is no longer a bilateral issue, and the theory that people, the United Nations and some other countries that were referring to Kashmir as administered Kashmir, Indian administered Kashmir, by annexing Kashmir, it is now formally occupied Kashmir, and I think that Pakistan should be leading the charge in changing that language and changing the terminology.
Absolutely. And the kind of, Mr. Mirza, the reactions we are getting from journalists as politicians, something that Mr. Soofi also highlighted. Tell us a little about the reactions within Turkey, within your colleagues, the kind of inaccessibility to even news reports, what we're hearing in that temporary uplift on Friday of this curfew was that tens and thousands are on the streets in Srinagar. So many have been hurt with pellet guns and rubber-coated steel bullets. How is the reaction there in terms of what is unfolding in terms of coverage?
Look, the reaction has been mixed, to be honest, internationally. Of course, Turkey has said that they stand by Pakistan. But on the other hand, you've got another country like the which in essence showed solidarity with India's move. Which is quite bizarre and has been quite widely condemned, amongst through commentary and through people on social media. Now, just one thing I wanted to address that some of the guests and you guys have been talking about, that there's going to be a lot of pressure put on and that this is no longer a bilateral issue. I agree, it's no longer a bilateral issue, but I think if there are atrocities or human rights violations and if there are protests and you have social media which will amplify all of that and show it, it doesn't really mean much unless you have the right kind of pressure coming from outside stakeholders, especially Pakistan. I think Pakistan needs to move a lot more forcefully than they have. People around the world have been wondering what exactly is Pakistan doing. I'm sure that they are working behind the scenes, and I think Prime Minister Imran Khan said that they're trying to prepare a legal case, an airtight case. But at the end of the day, I think we recall at the beginning or ending of last year, there was an extremely scathing UN report on the human rights situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. It was very scathing of what's taking place in Indian-occupied Kashmir, but nothing came of that. And that was one moment when we saw when Pakistan could have, at that point in time, started to try and internationalize the issue, but they missed an opportunity there. So it's important that Pakistan does not miss this opportunity while it's a crisis for Kashmiris and for anybody who cares for the Kashmiri people. At the same time, it is an opportunity for Pakistan to actually internationalize the issue, something that Pakistan has failed to do for decades.
But do you think maybe now it's finally broken out of that sort of redundancy and has made an impression with the kind of condemnation coming from across the world?
Only to an extent. To be honest, if you take a look and you analyze media from around the world, there was a little bit of attention paid in the first couple of days, and a lot more than is usually paid to Kashmir. But unless the pressure is sustained by Pakistan and by the United Nations to keep bringing the issue to the fore, it will die down. All people generally have short memories and they move on to the next crisis. And we don't want the Kashmiri people and their plight to be forgotten. So it's extremely important that the Pakistani government moves
quickly and continues to move, because like you mentioned, Mr. Mirza, it's a critical point here that the attention that needs to be brought to this issue, especially at a time like today when Eid is being celebrated across the world with the Muslim Ummah celebrating with loved ones and family members in different environments, for sure. Not everywhere there is peace. There are a lot of conflict zones, but what we are seeing right under our noses happening, unfolding close by, at least from Pakistan, is that even with a partial curfew being lifted, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are under a lot of strain. They're under a lot of security checks. And with the protests going on, we don't know yet, with the lack of information, because there is a media blackout, the kind of clashes that are taking place, what the people of Kashmir are going through. And just Mr. Thakur, I would like to highlight and get your point of view on this as well. This move was made, it was very sudden, it was rushed, a presidential decree was passed. I mean, it's been a week now. Clearly, Prime Minister Modi knew that this was going to fall at a time where the Kashmiris would be celebrating Eid. Why would he do it at such a sensitive time? Clearly violating all religious freedom that he says he's so behind.
I think in terms of the Modi government and BJP itself, everybody is very well aware that they are completely intolerant to the minorities and their religious beliefs. That the Hindutva books that they follow specifically tell them, as part of their ideology, to have a greater Hindu nation. And being a Hindu nation is not an Indian nation. There is a difference between an Indian and a Hindu nation. But specifically in terms of the timeline of how quickly it was done, I believe that maybe it wasn't done as quickly as we think it was. If we go back a little while and we consider the investigations and the banning of Jamaat-e-Islami and banning of JKLF inside Kashmir, and then locking up the pro-freedom leadership, locking up influencers inside the valley, and then this has been happening over a year. They've then launched NIA investigations against leaderships and various different pro-freedom people, putting them away, putting them in various locations, putting them in solitary confinement, unable to communicate with the rest of the population, unable to even send out a message. In fact, so there were so many rumors that Yasin Malik, something untoward has happened to Yasin Malik. So these things, I think it's been continuous. I think it has been a psyops operation. It's been a psychological operation by the Indian government to kind of make people prepare the people for what's coming next. And I think that the analysts over the last year have been constantly warning about in the Indian government and what they could potentially be doing inside Kashmir in the coming days. And now we've seen that with the presidential order, which was also illegal, and with the 200,000 extra armed forces turning into Kashmir, they formally made this into an occupation. It's now a colonial settlement issue as opposed to a simple territorial issue.
A colonial settlement issue, that's a really critical point there. Mirza, it's not just Jammu and Kashmir, obviously. There's also a lot of conflict in Yemen, in Syria. I mean, I just want to sort of ask you this. If these were regions which were not Muslim dominated, were not Muslim majority regions, I should say, and there was a festival, religious festival like Christmas or Hanukkah being observed, would it be the same kind of concern for those who are right now sitting back and not really doing much of an ongoing issue?
I mean, it's very hard to answer a hypothetical question like that. Obviously, there are those in the world today who have power, and there are those who don't. A lot of countries, Muslim majority countries, are not the most powerful, and they've been experiencing conflict for decades now. So I don't think it's anything new. What you're seeing today, I don't think the lack of concern is anything new. And what is interesting, I just wanted to touch upon the point that Mr. Thakur just made. I think the BJP, when they were running for re-election, essentially made a promise of what they have now essentially carried out. Mm-hmm. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. And also, another interesting thing that has happened in Kashmir is, as your other guest mentioned, they started locking up basically what you could call pro-India politicians, people who have been a part of the state, the government in Jammu. And so when they lock these people up, and these people have essentially now turned against the Indian state themselves. So they have inadvertently ended up uniting people in Kashmir against India, which I think is a byproduct that they definitely did not want, but in the end they're stuck with now, because even the pro-India politicians within Kashmir are now speaking the same language that the pro-Azadi Kashmiris speak, which is going to end up being quite a big problem for India if they're trying to settle things down. And one more point I'd like to make on when this was all starting off, and the Indian government said we're going to evacuate the pilgrims, the Hindu pilgrims who were making a pilgrimage in India, they had said we're going to take them out because there's threats of an attack. Now, the interesting thing is they did not ask any Kashmiri Muslims to make themselves safe or to evacuate them to any area. So one has to ask the Indian government, if you're trying to integrate and make Kashmir a part of India, then you must consider Kashmiris and Kashmiri Muslims as equals to the same Hindu pilgrimages same Hindu pilgrims who they wanted to evacuate and make safe. And I think that was an extremely telling moment, that they were willing to evacuate Hindu pilgrims and they didn't bother to show any sort of concern for the Kashmiri Muslims in the area.
That's a very interesting point, Mr. Mirza, and I want to bring it to you, Mr. Thakur. Kind of hypocrisy that starts to show, especially in the fake news industry. We're seeing a lot of new social media posts of constructed news events which try to portray an idea that things are very peaceful there. And what Mr. Mirza said, only the the Hindu devotees were asked to leave, arrangements were made, and also foreign tourists. And when it comes to the Muslims, the Kashmiris living there, Muslim majority Kashmiris living there, there's absolutely no move. Your take on this?
That this is going to continue being a political problem, then obviously I think the doubt is cleared. If anybody had any doubt that BJP and the Indian government and Modi and his team of people are secular and democratic, those doubts should be clear. Let's also remember that this is the same BJP whose party members include Pratigya Thakur, a convicted terrorist, who just recently, a couple of days ago, they're talking about getting rid of those charges. They have Yogi Adityanath. So when we talk about the issue of democracy and secularism, and we talk about how they've been treating the people of Kashmir, and we see how they took out those pilgrims out of Kashmir, this is no longer a political and territorial and Pakistan and India issue. This is now becoming a Muslim Hindu issue as well.
It is interesting you mentioned that, but let's not forget the very Prime Minister of India was also the Chief Minister of Gujarat when back in 2002, those riots took the lives of almost 1,000 Muslims. And he was, as it was claimed, behind initiating and accepting, not stopping the violence from the pogrom from happening. And with that, we're going to take a quick short break. Please stay. We'll be right back. Welcome back, and once again, Eid Mubarak to all our viewers across the world, celebrating this momentous religious festival, a 3-day festival, obviously a big time for Muslims to come together with loved ones. And we are talking here on Newswire about the kind of conflict zones where the Muslim Ummah is facing a lot of fear, unrest, and of course difficulty in not just communicating with loved ones, but also to exercise their very religious rights and freedom. Here I'd like to welcome 2 more guests who are joining us for this conversation. We have with us Mr. Tasleem Rehmani from Delhi. He is the National Secretary of SDPI, and also Mr. Moin Naim, Hamas representative, joining us from Istanbul. Let me come to you, Dr. Rehmani, your sort of opinion, please, on how this is unfolding, on the BJP-led government's move on revoking the special status of Kashmir, and then mostly about the kind of subjugation and suppression that we are seeing with the media blackout and the inability for Kashmiris to celebrate this momentous day.
You see, this is highly shocking and surprising, and everybody in the country has been caught unaware. On Friday, the 2nd of August, they suddenly stopped the peaceful going Amarnath Yatra, which is a very important festival here. So many people asked the country that why the Yatra has been opened. It was told to the nation that there are some security inputs, that some terror attack can be there on the Amarnath Yatra. Mm-hmm. But nobody believed that, and everybody could understood that, could smell, and there was a sense that something else is going to happen. Then the governor of Jammu and Kashmir, he also said that he's not aware of what's going on. All of a sudden, on 5th of August, in the morning, in the parliament, the government brought a bill without any consensus, without consulting any of the members of the parliament, the opposition groups, or the stakeholders in the state, the political parties of Kashmir. Nobody has been consulted. And suddenly, a bill has been tabled in the parliament, the upper house. And then, the same day the discussion was there, and same day, the bill has been passed, though there is the government is a minority in the upper house, but still they got the 2/3 vote. That means that they have managed the floor anyhow by their own means. I cannot say by what means, but they managed it. Well, and the Kashmir, particularly the valley, has been put under curfew under Article 144. All the connectivities like the cable television, like the telephone, mobile, internet, Srinagar is totally disconnected since that day. I mean, the 3rd of August onward, Srinagar has no contact with the valley. And obviously, the opposition here is surprised, and we are not taking this decision in a good taste, particularly the abrogation.
But Dr. Rehmani, sorry to interrupt you. You mentioned that the opposition is shocked and surprised. Is this the general sentiment, one would ask, across the academia, the learned, the journalists? What is the reaction like over there?
You see, I cannot talk about the electronic media. Most of the electronic channels are working on behalf of the government. But the social media is not like that. The social media is raising their objections on the manner and the way it has been done. And whatever the Kashmiri people, particularly the citizen of Valley, are going through, everybody is objecting to that. And apart from the social media, some of the opposition party, like the leaders of Communist Party of India, they tried to go inside Srinagar to have the first-hand information of Srinagar. But they have been detained at the airport. The leader of the Congress Party, Ghulam Nabi Azad, and the CPI leader, the Sitaram Yechuri and D. Raja, they tried to enter to Srinagar, but they were not allowed, and they were arrested on the spot.
Why do you think they were arrested? What would be the concern of the BJP government if they had made it to Srinagar?
Well, they don't want to let the people of the country what the real situation inside the Kashmir, particularly the valley, is. They are only showing the Kargil, not Kargil, Leh pictures, and some of the chosen picture with our NSA is going over there, and they are taking some videographs, some small clips of the videograph and sending it to the media just to make a picture, to create and by said that everything is normal, and the Kashmiri people has accepted this decision. Just they are trying to show. That's why they are not allowing the opposition forces to go inside Srinagar and let the country know the real picture inside.
Okay. Mr. Moin Naim, coming to you, let me first off ask you, how was the reaction, if you were to speak for your party, if you were to speak for Hamas and the people of Palestine, for Gaza, when they heard and saw the kind of situation evolving in Indian-occupied Kashmir?
First of all, in fact, this is a negatively surprising news. Was an addition to the pain and sadness that we have in Palestine, that we live in Palestine. Unfortunately, this news added or doubled our sadness and pain, because we feel that what happens in Palestine and in Kashmir and in Syria today is unfortunately in those peaceful and peace journey Hajj time is really like it's intensely done against the Muslim communities in those regions.
But Mr. Naim, also tell us, how does Eid normally unfold in the conflict zone that you come from in Gaza, in the West Bank? How do Muslims exercise their religious rights? Is there any kind of freedom or liberty?
That's what I'm trying to say, that the pain that we have during this Eid in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa, we have a problem that just tomorrow there is a huge plan for the extremist Jews and Zionist groups to attack Masjid al-Aqsa during Eid prayer. In Gaza today now, just one day before Eid, we have 4 Palestinians killed by the Israeli occupation forces. Unfortunately, Eid, we have 2 sides or 2 phases of Eid. The prayer, the religious phase, which is that we must do. We don't have a choice not to have Eid, to pray the Eid, but the happiness of the Eid that we had to have as for Muslim community. Unfortunately, we can't have it. We can't have the Eid while Gaza is under siege, that the Palestinians in Gaza don't have their medicine, that they don't have their basics of life there. In Quds, in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa, the same problem. In West Bank, just this night, tens of Palestinians were arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. That's why I'm saying that the pain and the sadness that we have in Palestine, unfortunately, don't let us have the happiness of the Eid. The reality of the Eid is prevented by the Israeli occupation and the Israeli aggression against Palestinian people and Muslim community in Palestine.
Right.
The same thing that we feel that now our brothers in Kashmir is facing by this last decision and this occupation forces there.
And you mentioned these very hard living conditions that those of Gaza are facing, and the world, it seems, has become desensitized. But tell us a little, as compared to last year's Eid, do you think this time round the situation is worse?
Yes, it's worse and worse. Unfortunately, in Gaza, the condition is going worse and worse. As I told you, last few days, we have tens of Palestinians killed. We have funerals in many homes in Gaza now. So the Eid feeling is going worse and worse in Palestine, especially in Gaza and in Quds, in Jerusalem, in Masjid al-Aqsa. The same, the attacks and aggression, occupation aggression against Palestinians in Gaza, I think it's intensely done not to let the Palestinians, the Muslim community in Palestine, to have their Eid and feeling the happiness of the Eid. Today now in Gaza we have no medicine, we have no enough food for the people in Gaza. You know, the Qurbani, we have it as a religious habit. About 30% only of the people who were killing or who were making Qurban in the last few years, this year they could not, they did the Qurban. We have 70% decrease of the Qurban there in Gaza those days. So this is could be one of the evidence that what's going on in Gaza. The Israeli occupation aggression today in the morning, yesterday, last Friday, those all days or those all attacks, I think, to prevent the Muslim community to have any Eid conditions or Eid
and at a time where mankind, one would imagine, be allowed to practice the basic tenet of human right, of their religious freedom, or whatever it may be, in whatever sect they may belong to. But tell us a little, for our viewerships, for our viewers, if you could tell us a little about the importance that the Al-Aqsa Mosque has, especially on these religious days for Muslims.
Yes, as I told you, even we know that all over the world, anywhere, even in under occupation region, the Eid prayers, those special days, Jum'ah prayers, are special days that they must, under the human rights rules, they must allow the people to practice their religious prayers. But tomorrow, a lot of Israeli occupation groups or Zionist groups, religious extremist groups, Jewish extremist groups, decided to attack Masjid al-Aqsa during the Eid prayer, which threaten the Muslims' life, which threatens the Muslims' freedom of prayer there, which is unfortunately supported and even protected by the Israeli occupation forces. And I think they decided now today, just an hour ago, not to allow the Palestinians with age less than 40 years to enter Masjid al-Aqsa. And this is one of the most clear attacks to the freedom of religious, freedom for prayer, which Israeli occupation claims that they have, and they let the Palestinians to have their all religious or freedom of religious or freedom of prayers. The same thing in Gaza borders. You know, the Palestinians are collected every Eid prayer close to the borders to announce to the world that they are under siege, they are under attack, and they attack the Muslims and the prayers during the prayer, during the Eid prayer. That's what's happening now in Gaza, or those days in Gaza, and that's what we expect tomorrow to happen in Masjid al-Aqsa and in Gaza also.
It is very unfortunate, Mr. Naim. Our sympathies and ours are with those in Gaza trying to practice a basic religious right here, a human right here. Dr. Rehmani, we're running out of time. I would just like to get your closing comments on the move that the BJP-led government has made, knowing that Eid would fall on Monday, that this would be a major religious event for the Muslim majority state of Jammu and Kashmir. Why was this move made at such a time?
I think it is going to be a very cool affair. There will not be any fervor or gaiety for this Eid. But I am sure about it that India cannot be Israel and Kashmir cannot be Palestine. We are a big country with a let-down constitution, and we have so many other internal problems like the northeastern problem, like the Punjab problem, like the South Indian problem. So we cannot afford to keep concentrating on one front and neglecting the other one. So it's very difficult for us to become an Israel and make Kashmir a Palestine. I'm sure that this is a fight for self-determination and justice, and we have to fight our war by our own self. We know international community will not come ahead to solve our problems. Like in Palestine, for last 70 years, Palestinians are fighting alone, and very few forces are coming together to help them. The same way the UN, the other international bodies are not going to come to help the Kashmiri people. They have to fight alone, or some small forces can help them, nothing more. So, but still, I don't feel that we are going to become Palestine.
All right. Dr. Rehmani, they're joining us from Delhi. Thanks so much for your time. And Mr. Naim also joining us from Istanbul. We've come to the point where we've run out of time for the show and we have to say goodbye. But as a quick closing note, once again, Eid Mubarak prayers and love to all of our viewers around the world, and a request that send your prayers to those in Indian-occupied Kashmir so that they too can have the right to practice their religious liberties. And with that, goodbye. See you next time.